Today I wanted to talk about another research article that's been recently published and get up on my soapbox to complain about the terrible state of entomological research and really biological research in general. This paper itself, the research is good. I'm not complaining about the actual data collection, what little data collection there is to be had in this paper. Um, it's actually the framing of the paper that I have a problem with. It's the sources that this paper uses. It's kind of the way that the information is interpreted and what this paper will be used for in the future, just based off of what these sorts of people, these conservationists, these invasive species researchers are like. So I get to kind of rant about that, which is fun. So the paper itself came up on Google News today. Here, uncharted territory, the arrival of Psychota albipennis in maritime Antarctica. Right off the bat, I don't understand if this was a Google decision or a Frontiers decision. Frontiers is not a minor journal system. They have a lot of different journals, Frontiers in blank. So this is Frontiers in Insect Science. Um, for whatever reason, either Google itself or Frontiers chose to put this blue morpho butterfly in the with the title. This is not the insect that they're talking about. The insect that they're talking about is Psychota albipennis, which is a drainfly, which looks like this. You might be familiar with these as the annoying little gnats that sometimes get into your bathroom that come either out of the sink or out of the tub, out of the drain. Or if you like have ever worked in an industrial kitchen, sometimes these will come out of the floor drains. The psychotids are the moth flies, the drain flies. They're extremely annoying. You generally have to like pour bleach down the drain to kill them because they're really good at withstanding water flow, so that you can't actually wash them out of the drain. You actually have to pour something down the drain to kill them. This is what the paper is about, not this blue morpho butterfly. Anyway, so this is the paper, same title, and I don't really understand how this paper got published in Frontiers because it's not much of a research article. This is really a record of collection. So, why this was published in a major journal, I don't know. It should have been published, I don't know, as a one paragraph notation for some insect museum. It's very bizarre. But anyway, this is about drainflies on King George Island, which is an island off of the coast of the peninsula of Antarctica. And we won't go through the whole paper. It's not very long. I'll link this in the description along with some of the other sources that it cites. But the paper itself is pretty short because it's really just a record of collection and identification. But they really go deep on the nonsense for something that's really just, we collected these flies, we ID'd them through morphological means and through genetic means, and this is where we collected them from, and this is where we saw them. So they talk this, the framing of this is the horrible terrestrial invasion of Antarctica by mostly invertebrates, but also some plants and things like that. And the something like 30% of these, so like 60 plus species, are insects. And these are terrible invasive insects of the subantarctic islands and the peninsular islands, which sounds really impressive when you're talking about Antarctica. And this is kind of my first problem with this is anyone who's reading this that isn't super familiar with Antarctica will think, oh, there are invasive species entering what we call the continent of Antarctica. That is not what is happening. So most of these islands are kind of in the middle of nowhere. So here's one of the islands. This is French Southern and Antarctic Island that they talk about in the references quite a bit. You can see it is not close to Antarctica. It's considered one of the outer islands. The reason this is included is because it's covered by the Antarctica Treaty. There are more of these. So that's Grande Terre. You have Macquarie Island over here by Australia. That's way off the coast. This is in like the South Pacific. This is the closest one, really, Possession Island. You have Prince Edward Island here off the coast of South Africa, which is included in this. And this article itself actually is one of the peninsula islands. This is on King George Island, which is right off the this major peninsula of Antarctica. So this is where this article takes place. This is where they collected these flies, these drain flies. So you might be thinking, okay, well, this is at least close enough to Antarctica, unlike all of these other islands that are referenced as in, the invasive islands or the islands with invasive species. This one is actually off the coast of Antarctica and not something off the coast of Africa or off the coast of Australia. So what you need to know about these drainflies is drainflies live in sewage systems generally, or plumbing systems, which is where they found these. And this is the case for all of these invasive species that they're decrying. Not all of them, but 95% of them. So these are the two papers that this article references: biological invasions in the Antarctic, extent, impact, and implications. And then biological invasions of terrestrial Antarctica, what is the current status and can we respond? And so I read through these papers trying to figure out what are all these species that this paper is talking about, because it says that there's something like 60 species of insects that have invaded Antarctica, which includes these outer islands that are actually closer to other continents. So, and also in much warmer than what you would think about with Antarctica. So with almost all of these insects that they're talking about invading Antarctica, they're really just pests of the research bases. So it's like cockroaches and aphids in the greenhouse and these drain flies in the plumbing system. And in 95% of these cases, these are species which cannot live outside of central heating, basically. There's a couple of insects that are kind of off of the Falkland Islands up here, off South Georgia Island, and the South Sandwich Islands, which really is, same sort of temperature as the Falkland Islands, that have invasive crabbed beetles and stuff like that. But when you're talking about the peninsular islands of Antarctica, they're just too cold for any of these species to survive. So going back to the actual article with these cycodid flies, these are things which are reproducing inside the sewage buildings on these research bases. And they have seen them outside the research base. They can't fly around because the wind is so strong that it will shred the wings of these cycodid flies, so they're just crawling around. And the paper even says, we have not been able to find any established reproducing populations outside of this sewage plant because it's too cold. It's very rarely above freezing on these islands. So they're just not capable of living here. It's kind of a ridiculous paper. And this is what I mean by this shouldn't have been in Frontiers. It's literally, we saw this in the sewage plant and we collected them, and this is what the fly was. And on top of it, this fly is cosmopolitan. It probably arrived in like some bilge water or something on one of the ships, or in the sewage system of the ship that brought the people there, or whatever, and now it's established in this sewage plant. So this brings up a big problem that I have with papers like this, because it's ringing these alarm bells like you actually have an invasive species, and you don't. Like, this is something that as soon as the people leave this base, this fly dies with them. So this is a concept that keeps creeping up in entomology, and it shows a problem with the internal definitions in entomology, and it shows a problem with the value system in entomology. And it's this distinction between invasion and foresy. So when we're talking about an invasive species, what we generally are referring to is a species which has expanded its natural habitat or natural ecosystem range via human activity of some case. And generally, this is why I say this paper isn't about invasion. It has to establish a breeding population that is independent of human activity in its new ecosystem. And that isn't what has happened in this paper. And that's not what has happened with almost all of these records of invasive species on any of these sub-Antarctic islands. They're almost always associated with a breeding population within the human settlement because it's just too cold on these islands. So that's invasion. And then when we talk about foresy, what we're talking about is generally we're talking, it can be to anything, but in entomology it's either insects or mites, which um, can go across large ranges or establish a new breeding population via movement by a larger species. So frequently this is like birds. There will be a lot of mites that will attach themselves to birds, and then the birds will fly the mites to a new area, which the mites could never get to by themselves. Ducks do this with snails. Snails will crawl up onto the feet of ducks when they're in a pond, and then the ducks will migrate across, however long a distance and take the snails with them. And that is how snails move to new lakes and new ponds and new rivers. And this is considered not invasion. This is considered a natural part of biology. So you have this very weird distinction where humans, biologists are in this instance, when we're talking about invasion biology, biologists considers humans and humanity as separate from nature. And this is an old way of thinking things. This kind of comes from, at least in the Western world, this comes from Christianity, where humans are separate from nature. They are a special creation, and it's their job to be the stewards of nature. This is not the perspective of modern materialistic biology and entomology, where humans are merely an outgrowth of nature. They're just one of, hundreds of thousands, one of millions of species that are just part of nature. So why does this distinction between invasion and foresy exist? Why don't we just call invasive species human phoretic species? Like, they're just using humans as the means of foresy. So this is a weird distinction that biologists who are probably overwhelmingly non-religious materialists cannot defend through their philosophical system. So it's the same with, like, if a mite is on my shoes because of the soil on my shoes and I introduce it into an area, how is that different from a snail on the feet of ducks? But we consider this different. We consider these different phenomena. And there was a recent article that came out about painted lady butterflies. Painted lady butterflies, for the first time, have been found in South America. They're found on basically every other continent except for Antarctica, but they were never found in South America. And what has happened is that these butterflies have managed to get into the jet stream, and they have migrated from Africa to South America via the jet stream. And this was, there was a lot of news made about this research, about finding these painted ladies in South America. Oh my God, isn't it so cool? Isn't nature so cool? They've managed to, and it wasn't like one or two butterflies, it was a lot of butterflies managed to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Oh my God, isn't this so cool? When humans accidentally move a caterpillar species, or when a caterpillar manages to take advantage of human activity to move, oh my God, this invasive species, this has to be stopped. So this incoherent sort of belief system is only held together through kind of the axiom humans bad, human activity bad. Anything that humans are doing is bad. But it's just kind of nonsensical. And in trying to interpret invasiveness through a lens of merely ecological impact or ecological changes is retarded. You have to interpret invasiveness differently, because on a long enough time scale, there are no stable ecological systems. All ecological systems are in flux. Species migrate, species die back, species go extinct, species arise. And they're always competing with each other. So the only coherent way to interpret invasiveness is through a lens of what human beings find desirable in an ecosystem. And so when we're talking about, it makes sense, at least I should say, when you're talking to the public about conservation, to talk about conservation of pollinators because humans like them, and conservation of butterflies because humans like them, or conservation of pandas because people like them. It does not make sense to talk to the public about, like, oh, the destruction of, parasitic fleas. No one cares. Like, this is not something that humans find desirable, so we don't care if there's an invasive species that wipes out a species of parasitic fleas, or wipes out a species of disease-carrying rats, or any of this other stuff. But in conservation biology and in conservation entomology, this is something that continuously comes up, and it annoys the hell out of me every time I see it because it doesn't make any sense. But I'll link to all of these articles in the description that I talked about here if you want to read them yourself. This article is, like I said, the science itself is fine when we're talking about how they collected these samples, they documented where they found everything, they did PCR for genetic identification. All of this is fine. The methodology is fine. It's the kind of ecosystem that this paper exists in that's nonsense. So I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for your time.